sound was hypnotic, a slow, rhythmic tap, tap that seemed to echo in the sudden, deafening silence of my own living room. It was the sound of my own life force, a single drop of crimson blood at a time, falling from my temple and splattering onto the honey-colored oak floor I had installed with my own hands. Each drop spread, a dark, blooming rose against the polished wood, a permanent stain on a day I knew would forever divide my life into before and after. My vision swam, the edges blurring into a haze of pain and shock, but my focus remained locked on that growing stain. The plush, cream-colored area rug beneath the coffee table, the one I'd saved for 3 paychecks, the one that represented my first real adult purchase for a home I could call my own, was now drinking my blood. The sting on my left cheek was a fiery brand, the exact shape of my mother's palm. I could still feel the pressure of my father's fingers, like 5 iron bands, digging into the soft flesh of my upper arm, where he had shoved me back, my skull connecting with the sharp, unforgiving corner of the heavy oak bookshelf. And then, through the ringing in my ears, I saw her, a small, motionless figure silhouetted in the hallway doorway, my 8-year-old daughter, Lily. Her favorite blue dress, the one with the little white daisies, seemed too bright, too innocent for the scene it framed. Her small hands were clenched into tiny fists at her sides, her entire body trembling like a leaf in a storm. The fortress of safety I had spent her entire life constructing, the lies I'd told her about why we didn't see Grandma and Grandpa often, the careful curation of her world. It all shattered into a million irreparable pieces in that single, violent instant. She was witnessing the raw, ugly truth I had sworn to protect her from. "You selfish, ungrateful little brat," my mother hissed, her voice a venomous whisper that cut deeper than any shout. Her wrist flicked, and the expensive gold bracelet I'd given her for her birthday last year, a peace offering, caught the afternoon light, glinting like a predator's eye. "You stand there in this apartment with your fancy job and your hoarded money, and you think you're better than us, better than your own flesh and blood." Behind her, Lily let out a small, choked cry, a sound of pure, unadulterated fear, and she lunged toward me, her small arms outstretched. My mother was faster, her body moving with a swift, cruel grace to block her path. "You stay out of this, you little nuisance," she snapped, her gaze never leaving mine. "Maybe if your mother learned to be half the woman your Aunt Chloe is, she wouldn't need to be put in her place." My name is Alina Martinez. I am 35 years old, a senior data security analyst, and a single mother. And this is not just a story about a family argument. This is the story of the day I was broken on the floor of my own home, and how I gathered those broken pieces and forged them into a weapon. This is the story of how I stopped being a victim and became the architect of my own deliverance. I could feel a warm, sticky trickle tracing a path from my hairline, down my temple, and along the line of my jaw. I tried to push myself up from the floor, but my legs felt like water, my balance stolen by the blow to my head and the tidal wave of adrenaline crashing through my system. My phone, discarded on the coffee table, still glowed with the text message that had been the match to this gasoline-soaked situation. The words were seared into my memory. "Chloe's rent is due tomorrow. She's family. Help her out. We didn't raise you to be this selfish." I had seen it 2 hours ago. I had taken a deep breath, silenced the rising panic, and made the conscious, deliberate choice not to reply. For the first time in my life, I had chosen us, me and Lily. And for that, they had descended upon my duplex like avenging angels of guilt. There had been no phone call, no warning knock. My mother had hammered on the front door with the side of her fist, a rapid, frantic pounding that sounded like the arrival of the police. My father had stood just behind her, a solid, imposing shadow, his face arranged in that familiar, smug mask of paternal disappointment, the one he perfected right before he launched into a lecture about duty and obligation. The moment I'd turned the lock and cracked the door open, she had forced her way inside. "Why are you ignoring us, Alina?" my mother had demanded, her voice shrill, her eyes scanning my living room with a critic's disdain. "What is so much more important than your family?" "Mom, Dad, I've already told you," I said, my voice surprisingly steady despite the frantic beating of my heart. "I cannot pay Chloe's rent this month. I simply don't have it." Lily's root canal, an unexpected and painful necessity, had completely emptied my emergency fund. My 30-year-old sister's conscience, sustained decision to float from one temporary retail job to another, quitting the moment she got bored, was not my financial responsibility. I had repeated this mantra to myself in the mirror for weeks. "Oh, I see," my father had interjected, his voice dripping with sarcasm as he stepped across my threshold without an invitation, his presence immediately making the room feel small and suffocating. "So your daughter's little toothache is more important than your own sister having a roof over her head? Is that the new math they teach you in your fancy tech job?" "Her little toothache was an infection that could have spread to her jawbone," I'd replied, my knuckles turning white as I clenched my hands at my sides. I was holding my ground, a novel and terrifying experience. And Chloe is a grown woman with a college degree. She has options. She simply chooses not to exercise them. I will not be held accountable for her choices anymore. That was the moment the air in the room changed. That was the moment the carefully constructed facade of civilized family discourse evaporated. My mother's face, usually a mask of controlled martyrdom, contorted into something primal and ugly. With a guttural scream of pure frustration, she swung her heavy leather purse, the one I'd also helped pay for, and hurled it across the room. It struck the wall with a sickening thud, scattering its contents across the floor. Then, before I could even process the movement, her hand swung back and connected with my face. The slap was hard, sharp, and humiliating. My head snapped to the side. As I recoiled, clutching my stinging cheek, my father moved. "You will listen to your mother," he roared, his own patience evaporating. He seized my upper arm, his grip brutal, and shoved me backward. I lost my footing, stumbling into the tall bookshelf that held my degree, my favorite novels, and Lily's art projects. The back of my head connected with the solid oak corner with a dull, sickening crack. A shower of black spots exploded in my vision. And my knees buckled, dropping me to the floor where I now sat, bleeding and disoriented. Now they were seated side by side on my gray linen sofa, a united front of righteous indignation. My bleeding head was a minor inconvenience. The fact that my daughter was weeping silently in the corner, her face buried in her knees, was irrelevant background noise. The only thing that held any meaning in their world was the transfer of $1,500 into my sister's bank account. "We are not leaving this house until you open your banking app and send Chloe that money," my father stated, his tone flat and final, as if he were a judge passing a sentence. "We will sit right here on this couch all night, all week if we have to. Make sure you don't squander what's left of your paycheck on another one of your so-called emergencies." I dragged my gaze from his cold, determined face to my daughter's. Her small shoulders were shaking, her tears leaving dark spots on the knees of her tights. The sight was a physical blow, but it was also a catalyst. Something deep within the core of my being, something that had bent and yielded and apologized and acquiesced for 35 years, suddenly did not just snap, crystallized. It transformed from pliable clay into unbreakable steel. "Get out," I whispered. The words were barely audible, but they carried a weight that silenced the room. They were cold, flat, and absolute. My mother actually let out a short, sharp bark of laughter. "Or what, Alina? Or what? You'll call the police on your own parents, have us arrested. You don't have the guts. You've never had the guts. You're not that pathetic." I didn't justify her with a response. I didn't try to reason, to explain, to plead. There was no point. The time for words was over. Slowly, deliberately, I pushed myself to my feet, ignoring the throbbing in my skull and the weakness in my legs. I walked past them, my focus entirely on my child. I knelt before Lily, my movements slow and calm so as not to frighten her further. I gently pried her hands from her face and took them in my own. They were ice cold. "Come with me, sweetheart," I said softly. Without a backward glance at my parents, I led my daughter down the short hall to my bedroom. I closed the door, and with hands that had finally stopped trembling, I turned the old-fashioned brass lock. The solid, metallic click was the most definitive sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of a boundary being drawn in steel. That night, Lily lay beside me in my bed, her small, warm body curled against mine, her hand holding onto my index finger as if it were a lifeline. The house was silent, but I could feel their oppressive presence just beyond the door, a dark energy contaminating my space. "Mommy," her tiny voice whispered into the darkness, fragile as glass. Why do Grandma and Grandpa hate you so much? Why did they hurt you? The question hung in the air, simple and devastating. I had no answer that would make sense to an 8-year-old. How could I explain a lifetime of conditional love, of psychological manipulation, of a ledger that was always kept, where my debits were always greater than my credits? So I didn't answer. I just held her tighter and let the silence speak. And in that profound quiet, something inside my soul finally fractured completely. And then, in the emptiness, it began to reassemble itself into a new, stronger configuration. I lay awake for hours, staring at the patterns the moonlight cast on the ceiling, connecting the dots of a lifetime. The way my parents had always openly favored Chloe, praising her for her mere existence while my achievements were met with a curt, "Don't let it go to your head." The escalating, brazen demands for money, starting with loans for my sister's tuition that were never repaid, evolving into expectations that I cover her car payments, her vacations, her life. The emotional blackmail, the silent treatments, the weaponized guilt. And now the ultimate escalation, physical violence. The line had not just been crossed, it had been obliterated. First rays of morning light, weak and gray, filtered through the slats of my blinds. I could hear them moving around in my kitchen, the familiar clatter of mugs, the gurgle of the coffee maker. They had made themselves at home, an occupying force in the territory of my life. I moved with a quiet, grim purpose. I dressed Lily carefully for school, helping her into a clean pair of jeans and a warm sweater, meticulously applying concealer to the faint, yellowish bruise that was already forming on my cheekbone. The mirror reflected a stranger, a woman with a purpling bruise at her hairline and eyes that held a new, cold fire. "We are going to be okay, Lily," I told her, crouching down to zip her jacket. My voice was different now. It wasn't just steady, it was resonant with a certainty I hadn't felt in years. "I promise you more than okay." She looked at me, her big, brown eyes searching mine, and then she nodded, a solemn, trusting gesture that made my heart ache with a ferocious love. We slipped out the back door like ghosts, while my parents argued in the kitchen about the brand of coffee I bought. The cool morning air felt like freedom. I drove Lily to school in a heavy silence, the only sound the hum of the car's engine. I kissed her forehead at the drop-off line, watching her until she disappeared safely inside the building. Then, instead of turning left toward the highway that led to my office, I turned right. I drove directly to the county courthouse, my mind clearer than it had ever been. The path forward was illuminated before me, step by inevitable step. You see, the woman bleeding on the floor was not the whole story. For the past 3 years, while playing the part of the dutiful, if occasionally resistant, daughter, I had been leading a double life. Every single raise, every performance bonus, every penny earned from freelance security consulting I did on the side, I had not been spending it. I had been building. I was an army of one, quietly amassing my resources. I wasn't just saving for a rainy day. I was preparing for the hurricane I knew was coming. And my most strategic, most secret investment. I had quietly, through an anonymous LLC I controlled, purchased the one asset my parents believed was their untouchable sanctuary, a 3-bedroom colonial house in the suburbs where I grew up. It had gone into foreclosure after the elderly landlord passed away, and I'd snatched it up for a song, using a combination of my savings and a private, low-interest loan from my former boss, a man who had become a silent investor after my freelance work saved his company from a devastating cyber attack. My parents, still renting month to month from the faceless corporation that now owned it, never had an inkling. Their daughter, the IT nerd, was their landlady. Visible bruises on my arm and the detailed medical report from the urgent care visit I made right after dropping off Lily were my evidence. I knew, standing before a judge who listened with a weary, knowing expression, I was granted an emergency protective order. They assaulted me in my own home, in front of my 8-year-old daughter, because I refused to subsidize my adult sister's lifestyle, I stated, my voice devoid of the tremor I usually felt when speaking of my family. It was just fact. The court officer who processed my paperwork met my eyes. "You've done the right thing today," he said, his voice kind. "It's hard, but let the system handle the rest now." But I wasn't finished. The system was one tool, but I had others. From the sterile quiet of my car in the courthouse parking garage, I made a call. I dialed the number for the property management company that handled my childhood home. "Hi, this is Alina Smith from Sable Holdings, LLC," I said, my voice professional and calm. "I'm calling about the tenants at 121 Maple Lane. Can you tell me if they are current on their rent?" The manager's voice was apologetic. I was actually about to initiate contact. They're 3 months behind. We were preparing to send a formal pay or quit notice tomorrow. A slow, cold smile spread across my face. "Hold off on that," I instructed smoothly. "I'll be handling this matter personally. Please expect a certified letter from my office." That evening, as I was trying to create a sense of normalcy for Lily by making macaroni and cheese, my phone lit up with a series of texts from an unknown number. They had found a new way through my digital wall. "Alina, you have humiliated this family beyond repair. Your daughter needs to learn what real family means. You are poisoning her against us. You will live to regret this betrayal, choosing strangers over your own sister." The cold blue light of the screen illuminated my face in the dimness of the kitchen. I read each message, absorbing their venom, feeling nothing. No guilt, no fear, just a distant, cold contempt. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, the instinct to defend, to explain, still a ghost in my muscles. And then I dismissed it. I placed the phone face down on the counter. I did not reply. I simply added that number to the growing block list. They were scrambling in the dark, completely unaware that the ground was already crumbling beneath their feet. They didn't know I had already authored their eviction notice, a 30-day countdown to their new reality. The final, poetic confrontation with my sister occurred a week later, in the brightly lit, sterile aisle of the local supermarket. I was comparing prices on pasta, my cart filled with generic brands and sale vegetables, when I heard a familiar, condescending laugh. Chloe stood a few feet away, her cart a monument to her subsidized existence: imported cheeses, boutique organic snacks, expensive bottles of wine, and a pile of high-end hair care products. She looked me up and down, her lip curling in a sneer. "Well, look who it is. Still playing the long-suffering victim, I see. It must be exhausting." I met her gaze, my expression neutral. "The only thing exhausting is the performance of your helplessness," I replied, my voice even. "I'm not playing a role, Chloe, but you're standing center stage and you're about to watch the whole set collapse." Her perfectly sculpted eyebrows furrowed in genuine confusion. "What are you even talking about? Did that hit to your head finally knock something loose?" I simply shook my head, a small, pitying smile on my face. Some people can't be told. They have to fall to understand the concept of gravity. The eviction notice, sent by a certified mail, arrived at their doorstep the next morning. My mother's scream through my phone was so loud I had to hold the receiver away from my ear. She was using yet another new number. "How could you? How could you do this to your own mother and father? We are your parents. The same way you could strike your daughter across the face in front of her child," I answered, my tone as flat and emotionless as a recorded message. It was surprisingly simple once I got the hang of it. "Where are we supposed to go?" she shrieked, her voice breaking into a sob, a performance of desperation that had manipulated me 1,000 times before. "We have nowhere." "That sounds like a problem you should have considered," I said, the words feeling clean and sharp as a scalpel. "But I'm sure Chloe has plenty of room. Maybe she can pay your rent for a change." The silence on the other end of the line was profound, then a sharp click. For the first time in my entire existence, I felt the leaden cloak of their expectation, their disappointment, their bottomless need simply lift. I felt terrifyingly, exhilaratingly light. I was free. The following week was a whirlwind of their chaotic fallout. My parents launched a smear campaign, calling every aunt, uncle, and distant cousin, painting me as a cruel, mentally unstable monster who was throwing her elderly parents out on the street. I remained a statue of silence. I did not engage. I did not defend myself. The restraining order spoke for itself, and the people who truly knew me, who had seen the dynamic for what it was, reached out to me with messages of support. They knew. Meanwhile, I picked Lily up from school one afternoon, my heart calm for the first time in months. "Sweetie," I said, buckling her into her car seat. "We're moving." Her eyes widened, sparkling with excitement. "Really? Where?" "To a home that is truly, completely ours," I told her. Using the nest egg I'd so carefully built and a portion of the rental income from my parents' house. The ultimate irony, I had closed on a small, charming bungalow just a few streets over. It wasn't a palace. It had creaky floorboards and a kitchen that needed updating. But it had a fenced-in backyard for Lily to play in, porch swing, and her favorite lavender bushes blooming by the front steps. Most importantly, it had peace. Deep, resonant silence that was filled with nothing but our own lives. According to my Aunt Marie, the one relative who still communicated with both sides, my parents were now frantically searching for a new place to live, expecting Chloe to take them in. Chloe, she reported, was suddenly too busy with her own life and couldn't possibly handle the stress. The poetic justice was so perfect it felt scripted. I didn't feel vengeful. I felt healed. The scar tissue was forming, strong and resilient. The final, face-to-face confrontation was still to come, a scene I felt compelled to witness, not for vengeance, but for closure. Exactly 30 days from the date stamped on the eviction notice, I stood on the sidewalk across the street from 121 Maple Lane. The property manager had confirmed the sheriff would be by at noon to enforce the order if they were not out. And I needed to see it with my own eyes. The front yard, once my mother's pride and joy, was a disaster zone. Heaping black trash bags slumped against the siding. Mismatched, half-broken furniture was piled haphazardly on the lawn. My mother's prized wrought iron patio set, now rusted and pathetic, sat waiting for the trash haulers. My father paced the length of the driveway, a caged tiger, his movements jerky with impotent rage. Chloe, of course, was absent. Aunt Marie had told me she'd taken a last-minute flight to Miami to de-stress and find her center. I took a deep breath and crossed the street, Lily's small, warm hand securely in mine. Her grip tightened the closer we got to the chaotic scene. She had a small backpack on her shoulders, the corner of her favorite sketchbook peeking out. I hadn't planned for her to be here, but she had asked, her face set with a determination that startled me. "I want to see it," she had said that morning over her cereal. "I want to see what happens when people are mean and they get what they deserve." The moment their eyes landed on me, my mother dropped the lamp she was carrying and charged across the grass, dragging a large, wheeled suitcase behind her that bumped clumsily over the uneven ground. "Alina, you cannot be serious. You are actually doing this," she screamed, her face flushed a mottled red, a mixture of fury and profound humiliation. "We are your family. You are throwing your own family out onto the street like we are garbage." I looked at her, my gaze steady, remembering the exact sensation of her palm against my skin, the sound of Lily's frightened cry echoing in the silence of my home. "You made me feel like garbage when I needed your protection," I said, my voice low and clear, carrying across the yard. "When your granddaughter needed to feel safe, you turned our home into a battlefield. And now you have the audacity to ask me for sympathy." My father stomped toward us, his large frame casting a long shadow that fell over Lily, causing her to press her small body tightly against my leg. "You think having money makes you powerful," he growled, his voice thick with contempt. "You've become arrogant, Alina. You're nothing but a jumped-up tenant who bought herself a cheap crown." "No," I replied, and in that moment, I felt the full, absolute truth of the words. I stopped being a tenant in my own life a long time ago. I became the author, and in your story, I became the owner. His hand shot out, instinct taking over, aiming to grab my wrist to physically impose his will one last time. This time, my body did not freeze. My heart did not stutter with fear. I stood my ground, my eyes locked on his. "Go ahead," I said, my voice sharp and clear as broken glass. "Touch me, and I promise you the police will be here faster than you can tell your next lie." His hand stopped, hovering in the air between us. He searched my face, my eyes, and something in his own gaze shifted, fractured, and then died. It was the dawning, horrifying realization that his power over me was an illusion. The spell was broken. Then, to my astonishment, Lily took a small, deliberate step forward, out from behind the protection of my body. She lifted her chin, a gesture so defiant, so perfectly mine, that it stole the air from my lungs. "You shouldn't have hurt my mom," she said, her voice quiet but unwavering, carrying a moral clarity that shamed them both. "You always said family was love, but your love was a lie." My mother's lower lip trembled, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. But they were not tears of remorse. They were tears of self-pity. She did not apologize. She never would. "You will regret this for the rest of your life," she hissed, clutching her handbag to her chest as if it were a shield containing the last shreds of her dignity. "No," I said, feeling the final chain fall away. "My only regret is that I didn't reclaim my life from you sooner." They stood there then, amidst the wreckage of their own making. Two people stripped bare of the control they had wielded like a weapon for decades. Their pride was scattered across the driveway, tangled in the belongings they had neglected and abused. They had ruled through guilt, through silence, through the ever-present threat of withdrawal. But now, the balance of power had not just shifted, it had been irrevocably overturned. And the feeling was like breathing pure, clean oxygen for the very first time. "Let's go home, Lily," I said, taking her hand again. We turned and walked back to our car. I did not look back. I could feel the weight of their combined gaze on my back, but it felt different now, impotent, distant, like the fatting buzz of a bothersome insect. That evening, in our new little kitchen that smelled of fresh paint and possibility, I poured 2 mugs of tea, hers chamomile with a spoonful of honey, mine a strong green tea. She sat across from me at the small wooden table, her legs swinging contentedly beneath her chair. Through the window over the sink, I could see the lavender bushes in the front yard, their purple heads catching the golden light of the setting sun, swaying gently in the breeze as if they had been waiting for us all along. "Mom," Lily asked, blowing on her tea, "do you feel better now?" I thought about it, truly considered the question. The anger was gone. The fear was gone. What remained was a profound, solid calm. "I feel clean," I said finally. "Like a very heavy, very dirty weight has been washed away for good." She nodded, a wise, understanding look in her eyes, as if she knew exactly what I meant. The healing was a conscious process. I started therapy, unpacking a lifetime of programmed responses. Lily started art therapy, painting out the fears she couldn't articulate with words. We were rebuilding, brick by careful brick, not just a house, but a sense of self-worth that had been systematically stolen, splintered, and mocked. A few weeks later, a text came through from Aunt Marie. She was the family gossip, still trying to bridge the uncrossable chasm. "Just so you know," it read, "your parents are in a 1-bedroom apartment above that old dry cleaner that went out of business on Main St. It's not great. And Chloe emptied their Venmo account last week and moved to Portland with some guy she met online. She's not returning their calls. No one else is stepping up to help them. They burned every bridge they had." I read the message. I felt a flicker of something, not satisfaction, not pity, just a distant acknowledgement of cause and effect. I did not reply. Instead, I opened my social media and posted a picture of Lily, her back to the camera, holding up her latest painting. A vibrant, joyful depiction of our little yellow bungalow with 2 tall stick figures and 1 small one, all holding hands under a brilliantly smiling sun. The caption was simple: "Her foundation is finally solid." And it was. I made the decision that day to make the separation permanent. The restraining order was extended indefinitely. I sent a final, polite message to Aunt Marie. "Thank you for the update, but I am no longer interested in news about them. That chapter of my life is closed." It was the most peaceful ending I could have ever imagined. Before we finish, I want to thank you for listening to my story. The journey to reclaim your life is never easy, but it is always, always worth it. If you're on your own path to setting boundaries and finding freedom, know that you are not alone. If this story resonated with you, if it gave you a spark of courage, please support our channel by hitting the like button and subscribing to Winds of Thought. We are a community dedicated to stories of healing, resilience, and empowerment. Your support helps us reach others who need to hear that they, too, can become the authors of their own lives. Thank you.